Hello, this is Ashutosh Varshney speaking to you today from Boston, not from Delhi. I returned to Boston last night from Delhi, and this is about my recent column for ThePrint, where I deal with the crisis in India's foreign policy as a result of President Donald Trump's two moves, one with respect to Pakistan after the Indo-Pak conflict of May this year, and his punitive tariffs of 50% for Indian exports, which is the highest along with Brazil. Now, all major foreign policies can be conceptualized as having a core, a semi-periphery, and a periphery. And this tripartite distinction is not geographical. It is actually based on degrees of or layers of significance. The core of India's foreign policy over the last 20, 25 years has focused on the United States, China, Pakistan, and Russia. And the semi-periphery includes relations with Britain, France, and Germany in Europe, Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Iran in the Middle East, India's neighborhood generally beyond China and Pakistan. That means Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, etc., and Canada, Brazil, Australia, Japan, and Singapore. Now, India has pursued since 2000, roughly since 2000, four primary goals with respect to the core. India cultivated greater closeness with the United States. India wanted to avoid a return of equivalence with respect to Pakistan. And it sought parity with China, and it wished to maintain cordiality and warmth with Russia. Now, cordiality and warmth with Russia are likely to remain undiminished, even though they're under significant threat. Half of Trump's tariff penalty has aimed at undermining India's reliance on oil imports from Russia. Even if that leads to a diversion to other sources, such as Saudi Arabia, India's dependence on Russia for arms and weapons has been of long standing and will not go down. That alone will keep the relationship fairly robust, at least in the short to medium run. The three other major components of the core concerning the US, Pakistan, and China are in grave crisis, and you can even say, somewhat dramatically, are in a free flow, in a free fall, actually, free fall, unless that downward gravitation can be arrested through policy interventions, which will be quite difficult. Trump has dealt two crushing blows to India. First, by threatening to impose a 50% tariff on India's exports to the US, leaving only the electronics such as smartphones and pharmaceuticals out. He's essentially declared a trade embargo on Indian goods, though luckily not on Indian services. US is the source of nearly a fifth of India's export income. Every fifth dollar from our exports worldwide comes from the United States. It will take time to find alternative markets. Roughly $60 billion worth of exports are in danger. Clothing from Tirupur, polished diamonds from Surat, shrimp from Andhra Pradesh, machinery from Noida and Chennai, auto parts from Western and Southern India. The second Trumpian blow is channeled through Pakistan, as I said. At least since 1999, if not earlier, this US has consistently downgraded its relationship with Pakistan, placing India on a higher pedestal. This was a reversal of the Cold War pattern, which essentially was Pakistan first and India later, and at best equivalence in some phases. A bipartisan consensus had emerged in the United States, in Washington. Both Democrats and Republicans embraced India. The recent India-Pak military conflict appears to have brought about a serious change. Nothing symbolizes that change more than President Trump's invitation to Pakistan's military chief, Field Marshal Asim Munir, for a luncheon meeting at the White House. Military chiefs do not get invitations to the White House unless they are also heads of state. For example, General Pervez Musharraf used to get such invitations, being head of Pakistani state. Agreements with Pakistan that have already been declared include joint business on bitcoins and cryptocurrency, exploration of potential oil reserves, which could perhaps mean mining rare earths in Balochistan. It's not clear which of these two the United States has in mind. And an old-style defense alliance, while not announced, and perhaps will not be announced, but you should note that the chief of CENTCOM, Central Command, based in Qatar, General Kurilla, has already said that Pakistan is an ally of America in countering terrorism and fighting terrorism. That is a truly surreal statement from India's perspective, which has suffered Pak-sponsored terrorism a lot in recent years. In other words, the turn towards Pakistan might have some strategic and economic logic to it, but it was almost certainly aggravated by India's non-recognition of the US role in bringing about a ceasefire in May. Trump's penchant for credit seeking is well known, and he has personalized US foreign policy to a very great extent. What words to use to appease egos when policies become so personalized is always a diplomatic challenge, and India's decision makers could not craft a diplomatic formulation. Words and deeds that would simultaneously satisfy India's sense of self-respect and the dictates of realism, or dictates of realpolitik. Let us now turn to China, the last core element of India's foreign policy for the last 20-25 years. In 1990, India and China had roughly the same GDP. By now, thanks to a blistering 9 to 9.5% economic growth rate per annum, China's economy is 5 times larger than India's. And China's military power has also become many times greater. As Vipin Narang and Pranab Vadi wrote in a recent essay in Foreign Affairs, and I quote, "China has become a nuclear powerhouse under Xi Jinping. She has chosen to build hundreds of new silos for land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, which can be launched within minutes to devastate the US homeland," unquote. In short, China's military prowess today is inching closer and closer to that of the United States, and that means significantly greater, many times greater than India's military prowess. In contrast, India's search for parity with China has eluded its grasp. To reach the perimeters of parity, India's economy needed to grow at 8 to 9% per annum over the last 10 to 15 years, as it did in the first decade, roughly, in the first decade of this century. And India also needed to make very, very heavy investments in military modernization. Neither has happened to a desirable degree. Equally, the United States had begun to see India as a counterweight to China, which after 2012, 2013, roughly speaking, came to be viewed as America's prime adversary. The logic that India was a counterweight to China drove the pro India bipartisan consensus in Washington, embraced both by the Republicans and the Democrats. Though, of course, one should note that the rising capabilities and the rising affluence and the rising power of Indian Americans has also contributed to this trend. India received valuable benefits from this turn in American foreign policy. India had in better defense cooperation than before, indeed, significantly better defense cooperation, and quite markedly, almost symbolic of the new era, world's second or third most valuable company, Apple, commenced its switch from China to India, and a very large proportion of iPhones, including high-end iPhones, are now produced by Apple in India and exported to the United States. How will India approach China under the new circumstances? Earlier, as I said, US used to counterbalance China through India. Will India now seek China's support for counterbalancing the United States if things worsen further? What will be the price of greater closeness with China, given that China supports Pakistan militarily and has been supporting Pakistan for a very long time? And India also has an unresolved border dispute with China. What will India have to make compromises on? India will have to approach China with a severe imbalance of power. This has already begun with the recent visit of China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi to Delhi, and Prime Minister Modi is headed to China later on this month for an SCO meeting in Tianjin. India's policymakers and strategic thinkers, to conclude, have to find out a way of this abyss. The key is trying to strike a balance between the norms of self-respect, without which proud nations can't live, and the realities of power, which can only be ignored at great peril. There is a real diplomatic challenge ahead. Bye for now, and I'll speak to you again in 2 weeks.